Hey everybody, this is Perch. This is the seventh video I'm recording today, so there's that. But that's okay. Still getting some good quality content out because there's some good quality questions from good quality listeners. That's right. It's all up to you. You guys are the lifeblood of this show, and right now you're probably thinking this is sarcasm, but I do mean it. So here's a good question here, and we could talk a little bit about moving and location. As somebody who's recently moved myself and probably sounded quite a bit Texas at the moment because I was sitting around with a lot of people who had thick Texan accents, and me being a sponge for the way people talk, it seems to just kind of infect me. So here we are. But this question goes, hey Perch, simple, boring question. There are no simple, well, there actually is. Simple, boring question here. With the way comics publishing is going, should the big two relocate headquarters out of two of the arguably the U.S.'s least competitive states, especially looking at California, moving to change how contractors are employed? We'll get more to that in a minute. People might be going, I don't know, what does that mean? Okay, well, we'll explain what that means. Would a smart DC or Marvel leave Burbank, New York City, and head down to Texas or Florida or some such state? Or would the perceived politics of such a move present this? All right. Well, definitely the contractor laws and some of the changes are going on, which are particularly aimed at Disney, since Disney exists in many states, but California in particular, trying to tighten the reins, if you will, of how employment works, particularly for independent contractors or part-time workers. And that is going to have financial impact on these companies, and it is going to make things harder for the companies. Now, before I get called a corporate shill again, I don't think that the changes particularly make life better for workers either. The way that some of the independent contractor rules are changing legally is that you have to offer them slightly better protections, but it's kind of like in one case you have to offer them insurance, but you don't have to give it to them for free. So what a lot of companies do when put in such a situation is they do offer their independent contractors insurance. You can buy it. And people are excited. The unions are like, victory for us. And then they realize that they have to pay to be part of those programs. And frankly, they would have gotten a better program if they would have just bought insurance on their own, as an independent provider rather than go through the company, because company plan kind of sucks. In many cases, it's ridiculously high deductible, and just not a good experience. So I know several people who were very pleased with the way some of the contractor laws changed in Washington state, only to discover that the insurance plan is offered by the employer was actually worse than what they were doing on their own. Now, there's differences. If you're married, have lots of kids, there's certain circumstances where it's like, well, if I do have medical problems and I do have dental problems, I got to put the kids in braces and all the rest, then paying these exorbitant insurance fees through my company as a contractor is better than less. But this is one of those examples where I've heard a lot of people talk about, hey, finally they're sticking it to big corporations in California and putting better protections in for contractors. But then if you look really closely at it, it's like, not really. Not particularly. But to the question, should the big two, should Marvel and DC move out of New York City, out of Burbank, and head to a more friendly state for business? Well, it would probably be a good idea. Now, I don't think they will do that, but it probably would be a good idea. But for a kind of a weird reason. I mean, for many reasons, but the reason I would give is increasingly the big two are using overseas labor. California in particular, and New York City is showing every indication that they will be closely behind, are going to have a number of labor and privacy laws that's going to make it a little bit more difficult, a little bit more costly, a little bit more troublesome to contract work out overseas. I don't know if DC does not do this, but for a period of time, there's a lot of talk that, and not just talk, parts of DC's business, not the core comic business, but parts of their business was actually incorporated in Delaware. Now, why do you do that? Well, if you incorporate in Delaware, you get a different tax rate. It is what a lot of startups do because it's more friendly to a number of different laws, and that's so they find a way to get a bank or an account, and they incorporate it over in Delaware, and comic companies have done this. I don't know. It wouldn't make a terribly big difference if they moved locations. I have heard talk that the Walt Disney Company is going to move some of their offices to Texas, even though there's not a Disney park. They're going to move some offices there to take advantage of the various business-friendly climate that Texas has. Probably some of the labor laws as well, just to avoid all doubt here. I do think protection of workers is a good idea. I absolutely do. I do think that big corporations often take advantage of workers, and I think that there's a lot of shady practices that it'd be nice if they clamp down on. And I do think that a lot of people will shout about things in the name of big business, but in the end, do a pretty poor job of doing kind of modest things to protect workers. Now, when I say protect workers, obviously some companies have taken that to extremes, and I think there's been some pretty lousy ways that that's rolled out. However, at the same time, I think that there's been plenty of states that have abused that, including Texas sometimes, including Florida at other times. But it's not always divided by political lines. Washington State, for example, is a very blue state, very left wing state, very union friendly, worker friendly state. But Washington State also has a terminated at will provision that means you don't have to give any kind of reason, justification, or severance when you terminate people. So a lot of people show up at in Seattle or in Washington and go, "This place is for the worker," and then they come to realize, like, "Oh wow, what do you know? A lot of these laws actually favor the company, the corporation." It's almost like there's giant companies like Microsoft and Amazon and others that set up shop in this state, and it's almost like the laws are written to protect big companies like that. Oh, go figure. It's weird. But I do think that, particularly for using international talent for some of the work that happens, it would probably be a good idea if the company set up shop in a state like that. Again, the couple states do really well. Colorado is another state that does pretty well with using labor kind of overseas. Is why you see a bunch of that. North Carolina is another one that does pretty good job with that. But California is somewhat getting harder to do business in where this is concerned, and New York has been quite hard to do business. There's ways around it, and obviously they found it, but it's more expensive. Now, to the other part of your question, would there be an uproar? Oh yeah, of course. If Marvel or DC moved to one of those states, then it would be Twitter outrage for a while. You would see some creators go, "Oh noes," even though they maybe live in Oregon and never go to headquarters except for maybe once a year, and several with COVID haven't been there in 2.5 years. But yeah, whatever. Who's counting, right? I think that but the funny thing is there might be a Twitter uproar, but nobody's going to quit. Nobody. Look, I mean, look at the people at Marvel who kind of demand different things based on their politics and everything else. But, all are pretty quiet about the fact they're taking money from Ike Perlmutter, like who was named and worked in the Trump administration. I mean, you're still under that guy. I know. It's like, oh, you got Buckley in there, you got Kevin Feige in there, and other things. But you do realize that a senior official of your company is Ike Perlmutter, who didn't just give money to Trump, but was actually had a named position, in Trump's administration, and is a loud and long-standing Republican, and has been for forever. And somehow, mysteriously, you got a bunch of people who thump their chests, being very, very progressive, and want to, get outraged about things like, did we hire a cultural sensitivity reader for this one shot, or this short story backup in this anthology book? Did we hire a sensitivity reader? Well, I don't know, but you do all work up your management chain is old Ike. I mean, look, hypocrisy is a funny thing. A lot of people need to put food on the table, need to feed themselves, and I get it. So you make your bets where you can, and it doesn't always work out perfect for you. You can't always stand on those principles when you got mouths to feed. It's okay. But I do have to chuckle from time to time when I see people at both companies, loudly making a lot of noise about politics. Hey, who'd Jim Lee donate to? Interesting question. Maybe some people should check on that one. Just sliding that out there. I mean, I've heard some things, but it's fine. It's all fine. I think it's perfectly reasonable for you to work for people or work under people or work in a state that doesn't align with you politically, unless you are a kind of lunatic snowflake person. And there are plenty of those out there on the right and on the left who just can't. There's no way I could possibly tolerate working in a state that I perceive as red. Now, the reality is, Texas is close to becoming a purple state. It's pretty mixed. A lot of the metro areas are very liberal, but it doesn't matter. It tilts just red enough to have a Republican governor in place, even though old Beto tries constantly to get in there. But it's clearly the den of all evil because people are dumb. That's why. But it is perfectly reasonable. I mean, I didn't agree with everything Seattle was all about by a mile. I don't agree with everything Texas is about by a mile. But I'm able to work here, survive here, be friends, shake hands, have a drink with people who do not align with me, and it works out just fine. Why? Because I'm a functional adult. That's why. So I think it's could they move? Yeah. Would there be an outrage? Yeah. It would be short lived. And the funny thing about Marvel in particular is Marvel could move to South Dakota and paint a giant picture of Trump on the outside of their building, and 99% of those creators would shut up and take that job and not say a word. And even people who don't work for Marvel would shut up and not say a word because there is a fear, a justifiable fear, honestly, that if you go at Marvel really hard, they'll blacklist you and you're done in comics. And so principles are great things, but people also know where their mouths are fed. You notice for all the Twitter outrage and the kind of comments that come in, very few people take shots at old Daddy Marvel. They'll make little comments about CB Cebulski and Akira Yoshida and everything else, but even there, they tread very carefully. It's funny. It's interesting to see people tiptoe around that one. The only people that go hard in the paint at that particular topic are people who have no hope of ever working in that company and haven't for quite some time, both because they're known loudmouths or just bad at their jobs or any number of things. So anyway, it's a good question. I think that it would be wise in a lot of cases to move. I think it would be better for them as business climate, but it won't happen. But it could. But it definitely won't happen. Anyway, thanks for the question. You all have a good night, and thanks for listening.